My name is Seyward Darby. I graduated in 2007, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Atavist magazine. I held a lot of roles because I basically lived at the Chronicle while I was in college, but my junior year, I was the editor-in-chief. So I started at the Chronicle working for the city and state department because I was from North Carolina, and there was actually, that would have been 2003-04, so we were heading into a presidential election, so there were lots of political things going on in the state. If I recall correctly, there was also a Senate race happening at the time there, and so I covered a lot of local and state politics, just because I happened to know the state, know the players, also had a car, which was very convenient. And then my sophomore year, I was the university editor. This was an interesting moment in the Chronicle's history because up until that point, typically the editor-in-chief had been a senior. And the year before me, a junior became the editor-in-chief. And I don't even remember the reasons why exactly, it just changed. And so then I became the editor-in-chief my junior year. And then my senior year, I started out as the deputy editor for the editorial page, I think, because I was going to take a break from being quite so busy. And then the second semester of my senior year, I took over the editorial pages. I guess I'm just a glutton for work. So I actually covered a lot of memorable things at the Chronicle, memorable for me, and I think memorable for the Duke community as well. Memorable for me was that I actually interviewed Dr. Ruth, the sexpert, when she was speaking on campus, I want to say at the Jewish Student Center. And I went to cover her talk, and then I wanted to ask her a couple of questions, and she was on her way to a dinner or the airport, I can't remember, had to get into a car. And so she was just get in the car with me. And so I got in the car with Dr. Ruth and her driver, and we drove around wherever she needed to go and talked about her life and being a sniper in the Israeli army and how she thought Burt Reynolds was the sexiest man in history. So that was a very memorable experience. And then as editor-in-chief my junior year, the lacrosse scandal happened. So that would have been March of 2006. And certainly that was memorable insofar as we went from, being a really, really good campus newspaper to suddenly covering the biggest news story in the country, and every other outlet in the country was on campus covering it. So that was certainly memorable, not least because it was this really seismic event, but also because of the sort of media firestorm that surrounded it. And it really gave me a lot of insight into what professional journalism is all about. The lacrosse scandal was a really difficult, complicated situation in a lot of different directions. And I think, for the Chronicle, we were first of all surprised by the level of attention it got on the national stage. In retrospect, it's less surprising just given sort of the different dynamics that were in play. But at the time, we were sort of bowled over by the fact that what had started out as a local story, suddenly the New York Times was calling our office asking, did we have a copy of the search warrant that the police had executed at the house? Could we share it? Video cameras were showing up in the newspaper office they were sort of using our office as a base of operations, but also they wanted to talk to us. So that was a very jarring experience to go from covering basketball and student government and, various academic policies to, covering what was a really, really complicated situation. But also, I think the thing that was really important for us at the Chronicle was, first of all, to be as utterly fair as possible. And so, and I think this is something anybody who worked there at the time is proud of, we weren't suggesting guilt when it had not been proven. We were trying to tell the story in a very straightforward way. We were also really not interested in feeding into the, town divided, campus divided narrative. Because the way we saw it, and I think the way most students experienced it, nobody really knew what to think at first because there was a lot of misinformation, there were a lot of rumors, but really there were just a lot of unanswered questions. And so in our coverage, we really tried to reflect that reality on campus. And then also as editor-in-chief, I thought it was really important to be a public face for the paper and to highlight the really, really good journalism that my fellow students were doing. I was less the reporter on the ground covering things, and I was more the person, going on local news and in some cases national news to talk about the Chronicle's reporting, what we had found, talking about the mood on campus. And so, it was really important to me to represent that we were a student organization that had been thrust into a very professional place, and we were really rising to the challenge. So I made so many good friends at the Chronicle, not least because I very rarely left the Chronicle while I was there. So it was, very much my community. And let's see. One of my close friends, Saidi Chen, who is a lawyer here in the city now, she was a year behind me. She was a university editor. She stopped by 2 nights ago here at my apartment to drop off a puzzle that she ordered for me, which was very nice of her. And so, somebody that's been in my life for a really long time. I, in addition to being a magazine editor, I write, and I published a book a few years ago, and my literary agent is also somebody I met at the Chronicle, Adam Eaglin, who was, city-state editor, maybe university editor. I can't remember his exact roles. He was also a year younger than I, but we're still incredibly close. I was just texting him this morning. And there's so many other people who I have connections to. Either, we're close friends or, people I encounter professionally. Sarah Ball, who's now the editor-in-chief of the Wall Street Journal magazine, was at the Chronicle at the time that I was. And then perhaps funniest in all of this is that I actually kind of met my husband at the Chronicle. He was not a Chronicle kid, but he came to a meeting for Tower View magazine. I can't remember what the specific issue was, but he was interested in doing an article for it, and I have a memory of him sitting across the lounge from me. He remembers me from classes, which I sort of feel bad about. But I remember seeing him there for the first time. And then we actually didn't start dating for several years until after college. But, technically I met him, or I remember meeting him in the Chronicle lounge. I really knew that I wanted to stay in journalism. I say stay in journalism because working at the Chronicle really felt like working in journalism while I was at Duke. And so after I graduated, I got something called the Hart Fellowship, which Duke still has. It's run through the Public Policy School. And I was placed with a media development organization in Eastern Europe. And so I really started my career there. And I worked as an assistant editor. I covered stories. I traveled all over the place. I was all over the former communist space. So I was based in the Czech Republic, but I traveled to Kyrgyzstan and Bosnia and other places. So that really gave me, experience as a professional journalist, but also as someone very lucky enough to experience parts of the world that I had not experienced before. When I finished my Hart Fellowship, I came back to the United States, and I got a job at the New Republic magazine. I started out as a reporter-researcher, was my official title, and so I did some research and reporting, and also a lot of fact-checking. And fact-checking, I think, is one of the best ways to really get into journalism. I think it teaches you so much about the craft, and also allows you to essentially shadow writers, because you're going back, you're checking their work, you're understanding how they came to create the pieces they created. So I am incredibly grateful for that time, and also big fan of telling folks who are trying to get into journalism that if they can get fact-checking gigs, it's a great way to learn. So I was at the New Republic for a couple of years, and then I sort of was on the fence about what kind of journalism I wanted to be doing. The New Republic covers a lot of politics. It was based in DC at the time. and I was kind of done with DC, so I went to graduate school for, strangely, international relations. But I was essentially using it as a side door to really immerse myself in human rights reporting and what that requires, knowledge of international law, of a variety of sort of national situations around the world. And so I spent 2 years in that program and was able to travel, reported more, went back to Eastern Europe, went to South Africa, some other places. When I finished my master's program, I got a job at Foreign Policy magazine. Makes a lot of sense after that degree. And so I worked as an editor there for 3 years. And that was a really great experience because that was really where I got to start learning how to do long form editing, which is what I specialize in now. So I love editing of all kinds, but I particularly love editing a huge bunch of text and making, kind of a ball of clay into something really beautiful. And the story I'm working on right now, for instance, not as a writer, but as an editor, is I think 12,000 words. And that's pretty average for what I work on. So I really got to sink my teeth into long form editing at Foreign Policy there for 3 years. And then I left Foreign Policy and came to the Activist magazine, which is a rare island in a challenging sea of media, in that it's a startup that has been quite stable for its existence, and is still around in a way that some other media startups have not been. So it's a digital only publication. We publish one story a month. So each issue is one story, and each issue is a very, very long narrative nonfiction story. So I work from home, which is pretty awesome. And I get to work really, really closely with writers on stories that are very plot driven. So cinematic, really immersive. Readers should really feel like they're inside the story, get swept up in the story. The kind of story that you finish and then you want to tell somebody about it. You want to recount it. So that's what I specialize in now, and I love it. I don't think I would be where I am at all without the Chronicle. And I think that, the Chronicle taught me the essentials of journalism. Some people might call them the basics, but I would really call them the essentials. How to be a good reporter, how to take detailed notes, how to craft a story, how to check your work, how to be ethical about your work. And I do think that the lacrosse scandal in particular, really was a trial by fire and forced a lot of us to grow up in real time in terms of, the work we were doing and how we were treating it. And I think that gave me a tremendous sense of the type of journalist that I wanted to be. It made me very sure that I did not want to work in television because I just did not think that the standards to which some of the TV outlets that were covering that story held themselves to were the standards that I would want to hold myself to, the standards that the Chronicle was holding itself to. So I really think just that essential foundation of what it means to be a journalist, the role of a journalist, gave me essentially the platform that I was able to then build a career on. I mean, when Dr. Ruth asks you to get in her car, get in the car with Dr. Ruth, because you never know. Sometimes, putting yourself in a situation as a reporter where you're like, well, this isn't a formal interview setting, but, maybe this is something where, a fun quote will come about or a great scene will come about. That was certainly a great example of that. And I have since found myself having very funny conversations, not funny ha-ha necessarily, but very informative and stimulating conversations with sources in car rides. So, but yeah, I'm so grateful for the Chronicle. I like to say that it was my Duke experience. And I didn't go to Duke knowing that was going to be the case. But I'm so glad that it was. And I think that especially when you study, I was an English major, and coming out of college, you can often feel when you have a liberal arts degree, you can feel a bit like, well, what skills do I have, right? And the Chronicle really gave me skills, writing skills, organizational skills, quite frankly, leadership skills, because of my role as editor-in-chief. And so I felt equipped coming out of college to really pursue the things I wanted to pursue. If I could go back to baby Seyward at the Chronicle, because that's what I was, a baby, I would tell her that chips out of the vending machine does not constitute a meal, despite what you may think it to in the morning. And nor does Diet Coke magically make those chips a meal. So I would tell her to eat healthier. I would tell her that sometimes mistakes are the best lessons. I'm a perfectionist, and I have vivid memories that, especially when I was the editor-in-chief, getting really upset about little things, you know, like a typo. We had some hilarious typos, including one where a word I will not repeat on film was truly accidentally put into an editorial, and I think our photo editor, I think it was the photo editor Tom Mendel, he like printed it out, blew it up, circled it, and put it on the soda machine. I was mortified. And it's one of those things, like, looking back on it, you know, rather than beating yourself up about something, look at what led to that mistake. I mean, that's a very small thing, but you know, rather than looking at things and saying, I'm mad at myself, I could have done this better, you know, like, how could I have made this error? Looking at it and saying, okay, where did I mess up? Or where did somebody mess up? And let's not do it again. So sort of letting things be water under the bridge is something I would tell my younger self. There was this confluence of things that happened on campus all at once. It's sort of like the year 2020, where just like so many bad things are happening in every direction. It was like that in microcosm. And I don't remember what they all were, except for one of them was that a bus blew up. It's not funny. Not like blew up and like people died, but like just caught on fire, like at the bus stop on West. And one of the photographers got this like incredible shot, this like fireball coming out the back of the bus. And I seem to remember, you know, somebody in the office being like, it's the apocalypse, like this, we're covering the apocalypse. Because it was just this weird, you know, confluence of stuff. And so that then became a joke. You know, maybe it was because the lacrosse thing was happening at the same time. And so it just felt like, I don't know, everything was going badly. I miss the print. I mean, I miss print everything. I'm a magazine person. I love print products, but it does sort of, I haven't been back to Duke's campus in any like meaningful way. I went through for a run through it a few years ago when I was at a wedding, but you know, the idea that the bins aren't there, that you can't like pick up the Chronicle, that you can't flip immediately to the back and do the crossword puzzle, which is what most people did, as opposed to reading all of the hard work we had put into it. Like, that bums me out. I understand why, and I think it's really exciting that it has such a robust online presence. Actually, I want to say it was either my junior or maybe senior year was the first time we really had a dedicated online editor. Because we were like, oh, the internet. It's this place where people get information. And so, you know, I'm obviously really excited that the Chronicle moved in the direction that it did. But there is this sort of like Luddite piece of my heart that's like, oh man, that means you can't pick up the paper. We also had this really, so there was a, right near the crossword puzzle in the back, there was this little box where we printed inside jokes every day. And Sarah Kwok, who was the managing editor my senior year, went on to work at Sports Illustrated for forever and now lives out in San Francisco. She was sort of like the queen of figuring out what was going to go in there. She definitely roasted me in it a couple of times. But it was just one of those things. It was like, you know, you and your friends making this thing that's really amazing that also, you know, the wider university, you know, sees, reads, relies on to a certain extent. And you also kind of got to put your nerdy personal stamp on it. And so, yeah, sad that that doesn't, I mean, maybe there are ways in which it, you know, something like that exists digitally. It's a really hard time in media. It's been a hard time in media for as long as I've been out of college, and probably before as well. And so, it's really hard at times to offer advice insofar as I don't think that there are really clear ladders, pathways, trajectories, whereas there once were. You got a job at a newspaper, you started out on the copy desk or whatever, and you worked your way up. Those types of jobs are fleeting. Sometimes the newspapers don't even exist anymore. So I think that the advice I would give to Chronicle folks or aspiring journalists is don't focus so much on the how, focus more on the why. What type of journalist do you want to be? What matters to you? What are your sort of essential ethics? What values do you want to carry through your career? Because I think so often people get caught up in and it's important because people need jobs and they need to get paid. And so it's really easy to get caught up in the how and the what's next, as opposed to really defining for yourself the type of career you want to have, the type of person you want to be in your career. And I think that really taking the opportunity at a place like the Chronicle, which is such an incredible training ground for journalism, to really think about that, read widely, watch widely, and really think about journalists you admire and how they do what they do, I think is really such an important starting point. And take advantage of it, not every university has a great paper, and the Chronicle is one of the greats, and I think that really making the most of your time and seeing it as not just an activity, but as essentially like a part of your education, I think is really important.